What is going on, investors? Hopefully you guys are doing well out there. Time to talk about Plug Power, ticker symbol PLUG. The company just came out with their Q2 earnings. We'll take a look at the revenue. We'll take a look at the profits or the lack thereof when it comes to this company. We'll all factor that in with the fact that this company still has a $14 billion valuation. Come and look at the forward estimates over this company. What is Wall Street? What are investors anticipating Plug Power achieving over the next couple of months, if not years? And we'll also look at it from an earnings perspective as well. Now, we do have three, count them, not one, not two, but three new shareholder lawsuits against Plug Power. So it's not just me that has some problems with this company. We'll come over and look at these financials. We've always had problems with this when you have net revenues of $151 million in the quarter and you have total cost at $183 million before you get to operating expenses. You still have negative, I repeat, negative gross margins, not negative operating margins, negative gross margins still at Plug Power. How in the heck is this stock trading at $24? My guess is the vast majority of people that buy shares in this company don't ever open up this document. Finally, we'll come over here and look at this from a technical perspective and see this one, how it's progressing from that sense. Now, we'll talk about Plug Power's Q2 revenue. That came in at $151 million. Revenue grew 21% year over year. It did miss expectations by about $11 million. That $151 million worth of revenue was expected by Wall Street to be closer to $162 million. Look, you've got over 23 analysts covering this company, at least in this most recent quarter. The low end of the estimate was at 141, the high end up here at 210. So you got that median estimate at about 162. So that 151, definitely a disappointment. Now, the company did reaffirm their full year revenue outlook to come between $900 million up to about $925 million. Wall Street expecting $915 million. Again, this is for the full year, but look, for the first 6 months over at Plug Power, we have just $292 million worth of revenue. So Plug Power essentially predicting that they're going to have over $600 million come in the door over the next 2 quarters. So when you come over here to Wall Street analysts, that's basically what they're projecting, about $275 million worth of revenue in the upcoming quarter. And then in Q4, expected to do about $328. You add these two numbers together, you get to about $600 million. That would represent 91% growth in Q3 and over 100% growth on that revenue side in Q4. Tell you what, if they're able to achieve that, which they did affirm with their guidance in these financials news, well, that would be pretty impressive growth towards the back half of this year. Now, there are going to be a lot of skeptics out there because this company actually has a pretty long track record of deceiving investors. On June 13th, 2022, a shareholder alleged in a Delaware court that Plug Power failed to disclose errors in the company's accounting, primarily related to the reported book value of right-to-use assets and related finance obligations. On June 29th, 2022, another shareholder in the state of Delaware filed another lawsuit saying that insiders facilitated sales of their personally held shares while in possession of material non-public information, essentially insider trading. And then finally, on July 19th, a third shareholder filed a third lawsuit in a Delaware court stating that the company willfully ignored or recklessly failed to inform themselves the obvious problems with the company's internal control practices and procedures and failed to make a good faith effort to correct the problems. While shareholder lawsuits not untypical, especially when we're talking about smaller cap companies, for a company this size in Plug Power, and also when we come over here and look at the financials, which have quite frankly stunk quite a bit whenever we look at them, when there's smoke, there is often fire. In the most recent quarter, we talked about how we had revenue coming in at $151 million. That was just 21% year over year growth. But I'll remind you, the company and Wall Street thinks this company will somehow grow 90 and 100% in the upcoming 2 quarters as well. We'll see if that ends up materializing. We do have cost of revenue down here. So we always had a problem with Plug Power because they had $151 million worth of revenue, and total cost to generate that revenue comes in at $183 million. So the gross loss is over $32 million. Now that did improve a little bit year over year. So we are seeing some signs of improvement. And if you also believe this company and Wall Street, the fact that they will grow 90 to 100% over the next 2 quarters, well, all of a sudden, maybe your gross loss starts to continue to improve. We'll certainly be here to see if that happens with Plug Power in Q3 and Q4. Now, the problem is you have these pesky operating expenses down here as well. Your research and development doubled from $11 million last year up to $23 million. I'll remind you, your revenue grew just 21% and your R&D doubled. So is that going to continue into the next quarter when this company is expecting to double their revenue as well? Certainly also a question that we have. Finally, you also have selling, general, and administrative fees. That also more than doubled from $38 million up to $95 million. So you get total operating expenses here at $114 million. Last year, folks, they were just at $49 million. So you take this $32 million loss, you add on another $114 million worth of operating expenses, and your total operating loss over at Plug Power in just a quarter is a whopping $146 million. So off of $151 million worth of revenue, you lost almost $2 for every dollar you brought in, as your operating loss is coming in at $146 million. This is an incredibly inefficient business. Last year, you were at an $89 million loss, so that just continues to get worse. What I could conceive happening over at Plug Power is, we'll give credit. Maybe Wall Street's right. Maybe there isn't a lot of smoke with this company deceiving investors in the past. All of a sudden, yes, they will grow 90 to 100% in Q3 and Q4. I think your gross loss turns around at that point, but this operating expense line doesn't have any signs, absolutely zero signs, that this is starting to scale in the right direction, and these operating expenses will just continue to feed an operating loss. Now, you do have other expenses that are actually rather significant over at this company, particularly interest expense coming in at about $11 million. They don't offset that with interest income of just $3.8 million to service this debt that this company has on the balance sheet. Not cheap one bit. Pull down to a net loss in the quarter of $173 million. That's almost twice as much as where you were last year. A little less than that. You were at about $100 million loss last year. Through 6 months of this year, you have a net loss of $329 million. Folks, this is about as a speculative of investment as I have ever seen. Cash and cash equivalents, about the same. What I did notice, a heavy amount of inventory over at this company, which would support the fact that, yes, we are going to grow 90 to 100% over the next 2 quarters. You better have the inventory on hand, and there is evidence of that. At the beginning of the year, back in December, we had about $270 million inventory. Now we have about $430 million worth of inventory. So that, quite frankly, is probably actually a good sign for this company, at least meeting the obligations and expectations that investors have. From the long-term debt side, we did actually see a repayment of that. That went down from 112 to 91, probably because when we looked at the interest expense, this is getting pretty expensive to service this debt, and Plug Power is trying to control those costs a little bit. Over the last 6 months, you went down from 24 million down to about 19.9 million on that interest expense side. Now, for the 6-month period, we're looking at cash flows over at Plug Power. We pull down just a disastrous net loss of $329 million last year. We lost about half as much at $160 million loss. Now, the good news is, folks, the fact is Plug Power stock over the last year is down 12%, but comforting news is the fact that stock-based compensation over at Plug Power quadrupled from 20.8 all the way up to $88 million. Again, our net loss doubled in the most recent 6 months period, but our stock-based compensation, we quadrupled that. So again, there's a reason why you have these shareholder lawsuits, 3 of them, not 1, not 2, but 3 of them in the most recent quarter. There are other lawsuits pending and already ones that they disclosed. These are the 3 that are brand new. Okay, I'm not saying that these are the only 3. These are just the 3 that have been disclosed in the most recent quarter. This is one of the reasons why the executives of this company have just gotten filthy rich while running a company that just looks like bankruptcy is the likely outcome. You get to add things back in and subtract things in cash flows, but you come all the way down to net cash used in the operating activities. And it's even worse. Okay, if a net loss, after you factor in your taxes and everything, you lose $329 million, but you factor in that cash to operate that business was actually more at $405 million. That's up over $150 million more cash burned out of the business than the previous 6-month period that we have. Now, this company is aggressively buying property, plant, and equipment. Last year was $33 million, all the way up to $157 million. Now, some of you are watching, you're shareholders of Plug Power, you're bullish this name. This is actually exactly what you want. You want Wall Street on board with the growth that is about to come down the door. You want this company increasing their inventory rapidly over the previous 6-month period, and you want them aggressively investing in property, plant, and equipment. So there's certainly a scenario where these financials turn around, but right now these are still a hot piece of garbage. Financing activities, the company didn't do as much in the most recent quarter. They repaid about $36 million in debt. They took on another $35 million, paid down some financial obligations here on their leases, and that's about it. A lot of cash bleeding out of the company to the tune of $225 million over the last 6 months. Certainly chapter 11 is not like a quarter or two away, but I tell you what, if Q3 and Q4 don't pan out for Plug Power, this stock probably going much lower, likely retesting the lows that it made earlier this year, down here at about $13 per share. Now, from a technical perspective, it is at we're talking about a hard level of resistance right here. For the longest time over at Plug Power, about $25 per share acted as a level of support. In fact, it held for basically a year's time, maybe even almost 2 years' time. $25 per share was a hard level. We've broken through that level more recently, and now we're up here retesting it. In the intermediate term, you have a pretty steep downtrend going on in this one. Longer term, you're also down. Shorter term, though, like we're seeing with a lot of stocks, there is some momentum in the stock market. You are seeing stocks, including very speculative stocks like Plug Power, rally. These types of moves are going to scare away the disciplined short seller, but I think once this technical trend starts to play out, I think we reverse and we head lower on this one, as yes, the shorter term trend is up, but that shorter term trend would really have to push up another $10, $15 per share on this one in order to erase the intermediate trend, which is pretty rapidly down. We have to remind ourselves with Plug Power, you still have over a $14 billion valuation on a company that doesn't generate positive cash flow, that doesn't even generate positive gross margins, let alone operating margins. If you don't understand the difference between gross margins and operating margins, I would start there before you buy anything like Plug Power. And even if this company is to reach $900 to nearly $1 billion worth of revenue for its full year, you're still looking at a company trading nearly 14 times sales and not generating any profits, as when we look at Wall Street estimates, we are not expecting a profit from this company for another 2 years. Does the stock market have the leeway and have the patience to allow Plug Power to lose money for the next 2 years, or will this company come up short when it comes to the lofty expectations it has and Wall Street has for it? Not only that, you have lots of burned shareholders, which will likely see their day in court as well. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. We'll be back in soon with more. Good luck with your investments.